Hey guys, tonight we drift quietly into the ancient city of Babylon, where the air still tastes faintly of river water and baked clay, and the torchlight glimmers off palace walls like half-forgotten dreams. You stand at the edge of the royal gardens, toes sinking into cool dirt, staring at a maze of winding canals, drooping date palms, and gardeners who haven't slept since the last moon cycle. The night is calm, but the work is not. Somewhere off to your left, a man is furiously trying to convince a mud-brick wall to stop leaking like a broken bathtub. You probably won't survive this if you're allergic to hard labor, scorpions, or someone yelling about water rations at 3 in the morning. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments, just so we all know who else is awake at this questionable hour of human existence. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take a gentle step forward, your sandals brushing against soft reeds that line the nearest canal. The Euphrates River lies not too far from here, its waters harnessed by a complex system of dikes and channels that snake through the city like veins feeding a restless body. The gardeners, mostly men with rough hands and backs permanently hunched from lifting wet clay, move quietly by torchlight, checking if the water flows properly through the narrow canals carved into the earth and held in place by stacked mud bricks. These bricks, sun-baked, not kiln-fired, crumble if you look at them too harshly, which is both a historical fact and the main source of stress wrinkles in this garden. You pass an elderly gardener named Atana, beard reaching his chest like a dusty waterfall. He mutters about how the king wants more figs by sunrise, as if figs sprout faster just because royalty demands it. His hands trace the flow of water, feeling for leaks the way you might check a phone for cracks after dropping it. Historians still argue whether Babylonian irrigation was marvelously advanced or one big mud-based gamble. But standing here in the silver glow of the moon, you suspect it's a bit of both. The mainstream historical fact drifting through your mind is this: Babylon's gardens, royal or otherwise, survived thanks to a careful irrigation system that pulled water from the Euphrates using canals, reservoirs, and sometimes water-lifting devices like the shadoof. Without this setup, the scorching Mesopotamian sun would leave nothing but dust and sarcasm behind. But there's also a quirky tidbit you notice: a row of clay pots buried halfway in the ground, each one filled with water and covered with a flat stone. These, a gardener tells you, slowly seep water into the soil around precious melon plants. It's like ancient Babylon's version of drip irrigation, just with more clay and fewer YouTube tutorials. Someone behind you curses softly as a sandal sinks into a muddy patch. He's trying to repair a narrow canal by stuffing wet straw between cracked bricks. If this wall collapses again, he groans, I'm becoming a goat herder. You can't blame him. The palace gardens might look serene from afar. Lush palms, hanging vines, the soft chirp of night insects, but up close, it's a daily war against dryness, erosion, and crocodiles in the river who have absolutely no respect for personal space. To your right, a young apprentice named Belili carries a clay tablet under her arm. She's tracking which plots have been watered and which ones are thirstier than a traveler without shade. Her tablet, still soft, shows tiny wedge-shaped impressions, records of labor, hours, and who forgot to close the southern gate of the canal last week. You notice a smirk on her face when she walks past the overseer, probably remembering how he tripped into a cucumber patch this morning while lecturing everyone about efficiency. The night air smells like wet earth, mint leaves, and a hint of smoke from distant hearths. You hear frogs croaking from the reeds and the soft creak of wooden water gates being lifted. A gardener hands you a reed torch and gestures toward a corner of the garden where the ground looks drier than your sense of humor. You follow, stepping carefully between rows of barley and herbs. The earth is cracked, thirsty. One wrong move with the water gate, and you'll either flood this entire section or anger someone important enough to have you reassigned to cleaning latrines. Water reaches the edge of the canal, shivering under the light of the moon. You pause, holding your breath, then open the gate just enough to let a narrow stream flow. The soil drinks eagerly, darkening in slow, satisfying patches. For a moment, everything is calm. Then someone yells from across the garden, "Who let the goats into the melon patch again?" You pretend you didn't hear and continue adjusting the water flow like a responsible adult. As you walk further, you notice tall mudbrick walls around the garden, designed to protect it from wind and wandering animals. These walls are constantly patched and rebuilt since rain, or even heavy dew, can erode them. Atana tells you that gardeners spend as much time maintaining the infrastructure as they do growing plants. Gardens don't water themselves, unless you're the king and make someone else do it. The moon hangs low, casting a gentle silver glaze on the canal's surface. You dip your fingers into the cool water and feel the tiny rush of current. Somewhere out there, beyond the palace walls, lies the bustling city. Scribes, merchants, board guards watching the gate. But here, in the quiet garden, time slows. The mud, the bricks, the shifting water, all of it feels ancient, patient, and slightly judgmental. You take one last look at the lantern-lit paths, the hard-working gardeners, the nearly silent pulse of the Euphrates far in the distance. Your journey has only just begun, and already your sandals are muddy, and your appreciation for ancient agriculture has tripled. Don't worry, you'll get used to the smell of wet clay and regret.
You wake up with a crick in your neck and mud still stuck between your toes because, apparently, washing your feet before sleeping wasn't a luxury you were afforded last night. Dawn hasn't fully cracked yet, but you're already following a quiet procession of gardeners towards half-built channels carved into the earth. These aren't just random ditches. They're the pride and burden of Babylon. Mudbrick canals that keep this land from turning into one giant sandcastle of disappointment. The Euphrates glimmers pale and sluggish in the morning light, and the gardeners move with the practiced exhaustion of people who've been doing this their entire lives. You step closer to the muddy embankment, and someone hands you a chunk of wet clay. "For the walls," he says. No instructions, just vibes. Your fingers sink into the cool mud, and you start shaping it into a rectangular brick, thinking this is basically ancient Lego, but stickier and far less fun. These mudbrick canals are simple but genius. Water is directed from the river into narrow channels, which wind through fields like cracked veins across the land. Once dried in the sun, the bricks act as barriers, guiding the flow toward date palms, wheat fields, and vegetable patches. Actual historical fact, Babylonians used these canal networks to turn arid land fertile, allowing them to grow crops like barley, flax, and onions, even when rainfall was practically non-existent. You carefully carry your newly formed brick to a growing wall lining a shallow trench. The trench curves gently, planned to catch water without letting it spill wildly across the field like a mismanaged TikTok trend. But here comes your first true challenge, stacking the bricks without them collapsing into sad lumps. A seasoned gardener taps your handiwork and watches the brick slouch like it just gave up on life. "Too wet," he says with a smirk, "like your eyes will be soon." Joke one for the morning. Welcome to Mud Engineering School, where the tests are messy and the failure rate is 100% before breakfast. As workers lay bricks, others mix straw into mud to strengthen it, because without reinforcement, these structures would melt in the rain like sugar cubes in tea. You step aside as a pair of oxen drag a plank to flatten the canal base. The sound of squelching earth and low animal groans blend into a kind of earthy lullaby. A fringed tidbit floats into conversation. Some gardeners believe that adding a pinch of crushed date pits into the mud makes the bricks last longer. No science behind it, but superstition has a grip stronger than dried clay. You start noticing how carefully the canals are angled, just enough slope to keep the water moving, but not so steep that it washes away the soil. Historians still argue whether the Babylonians calculated these gradients deliberately or simply learned through trial, error, and a lot of cursing at muddy floods. Either way, it works most of the time, unless goats get involved. Goats always ruin everything. Someone calls you over to help patch a canal leak.
A crack is formed where water is spilling into an unwanted puddle, slowly turning into a mosquito resort. You slap some mud on it, pat it in place, and for one shining moment feel like you've contributed to civilization. Then the wall collapses again. The gardener beside you sighs. It's okay, first 5,000 tries of practice. By midday, the sun is overhead, turning the mud bricks into hard, sun-baked blocks the color of toasted bread. You walk along the length of a newly finished canal, its sides smooth and firm, water trickling through in a silvery ribbon. The sound is hypnotic, the gentle lap of water against mud brick, the soft rustle of palm leaves nearby. A real debate to chew on. Some scholars think that the earliest canal systems date back long before Babylon's rise, possibly to Sumerian engineers who left behind prototypes of irrigation carved in clay. Others argue that Babylon refined and expanded these systems to previously unseen levels of organization and scale. Historians still argue whether Babylon was innovator or copycat. You overhear a gardener bragging about a canal they built last season that stretched for nearly a mile and watered an entire grove of date palms owned by a merchant who paid in barley, beer, and one slightly used goat. Payment systems were flexible back then. Joke 2 arrives when another worker grins and says, "If you want to get rich, don't grow crops, build canals and charge your neighbors for water they already walked past." Honestly, ancient capitalism hits hard. You pause to feel the mud brick wall beneath your palm. It's warm from the sun, firm yet crumbly around the edges. Little cracks snake through it like lines on an aging face. The gardeners know this means repairs soon, but for now, the canal holds. As the sun drifts lower, the water cools, mirroring streaks of orange and pink sky. The canal stretches outward like a quiet promise. If maintained, it'll feed gardens, orchards, and families. If neglected, it'll crumble back into dust faster than you can say irrigation collapse. The day ends with one last quirky sight, a child floating tiny reed boats in the canal, pretending they are royal barges. You almost warn them about crocodiles. Then remember, wrong river system. Still, the mud squelches pleasantly under your feet, and the breeze carries a hint of moisture that almost feels like mercy. Joke 3. Someone claims that if you kiss your favorite brick before placing it, it won't crack. Nobody knows if it works, but you catch one gardener doing it when he thinks no one's watching. And as the twilight deepens and torches flicker along the riverbank, the mud brick canals wait silently, ready to carry life through the dark and into tomorrow's sun. You wake to the sound of sloshing water and the low groans of men who already regret existing. Morning mist curls along the riverbank, thin as a sigh, and you're standing beside a wooden pole balanced on a frame, your first encounter with the shadoof. It's a simple machine, a long beam, a counterweight on one end, a bucket on the other. Elegant in design, torturous in practice. You watch a gardener named Amur swing the beam down, dip the bucket into the river, and yank it up using raw arm strength and maybe some leftover spite from yesterday. The Euphrates isn't generous. Its banks are low, and the gardens are raised just enough to make gravity your enemy. So the shadoof becomes the muscle-powered elevator of water. Historically accurate side note, the shadoof was widely used in Mesopotamia and Egypt as early as 2000 BCE, allowing farmers to lift water for irrigation. Useful, but also excellent at turning shoulders into burning jelly. Amur hands you the beam. "Your turn," he says with a smile that's far too cheerful for this hour. You grip the wooden pole. Splinters immediately lodge into your palms, your welcome gift. You pull, knees shaking, and the bucket rises an inch before your arms revolt. The gardener laughs, not unkindly. It gets easier after a few years. Or you stop feeling anything. Same result. Joke 1 for the morning, gym memberships don't exist yet, but congratulations, you've joined Babylonian CrossFit. Mud, sweat, and existential dread. Each time you swing the shadoof, water arcs through the air in glistening droplets before splashing into a trough. From there, mud brick canals do the rest. Around you, a line of shadoofs creaks and thuds like a chorus of tired metronomes.
Some are made of reeds tied with palm fiber, others sturdier wood traded from forests far north. You spot a boy barely 12, hauling mutter like he's built of wiry determination and roasted chickpeas. A fringe tidbit drifts into conversation. Some gardeners say whispering blessings to the bucket ensures it fills with cooperative water and not the lazy kind that spills. You try whispering, but the bucket still dumps half its contents on your feet. Lazy water. As the sun rises, your shoulders start to burn and your back protests every movement. You glance over to an older woman operating a shadoof with ease, her muscles carved from years of river work. She catches your eye and says, "If you drop it on your foot, just scream. No one will know if it's pain or prayer." Historians still argue whether the counterweights were always stone or sometimes clay wrapped in reed mats. Some believe early versions used baskets of sand, adjusted through trial and error and foot injuries. Either way, the principle remains: fight gravity, hurt shoulders. Your arms tremble as you lift another bucket. It's like trying to haul a wet cow using nothing but cursed determination. The water sloshes into the trough and drips down your elbows. The sun climbs higher. Sweat and river water blur together, and you stop caring which is which. Nearby, a worker ties a small clay charm to his shadoof's rope. It's shaped like a tiny fish, meant to bring water luck, whatever that means. Quirky fact, archaeologists have found amulets shaped like fish, frogs, and spiral symbols near ancient irrigation sites, thought to ward off drought or canal collapse. Joke too arrives when someone mutters, "If we had wings like those temple carvings of gods, we wouldn't be doing this." Another answers, "If I were a god, first miracle, self-filling buckets." Amur pauses beside you, rubbing his shoulder with a grimace. "This job gives you arms like bronze statues and joints like dry reeds." He points to a pile of discarded sandals near the river, straps broken, soles worn smooth with mud and water. Babylon's version of gym towels. You take a break under a fig tree. The leaves provide patchy shade, and the air smells faintly of sweet sap and wet clay. You stretch your fingers, stiff and aching. Birds swoop overhead, unconcerned by irrigation crises. You sip from a clay cup of barley water, lukewarm but soothing. A child nearby counts each bucket lifted, turning it into a game. You manage 5 before collapsing. He claps anyway. A scholarly debate drifts by on the wind. Some argue that shadoofs were a Mesopotamian invention, later adopted by Egypt. Others claim the Egyptians invented them first, and Babylon borrowed the idea like someone copying homework. Historians still argue whether these two civilizations shared tech willingly or through quiet envy. Work resumes. You grip the beam again, legs braced, heart murmuring protests. The bucket dips, fills, rises, over and over. You are now part of the eternal rhythm of Babylon. Lift, pour, breathe. Repeat. Joke 3, someone claims the shadoof was invented by a man who just really hated stairs and wanted to make climbing water instead. You laugh, or maybe you wheeze. Hard to tell. By late afternoon, your shoulders feel like they're made of clay left too long in the sun, cracked and ready to fall apart. But the fields glisten with patches of wet soil, and little sprouts tremble in the breeze, grateful for your sacrifice. The sun softens. The river quiets. You step away from the shadoof and into the evening glow, every muscle humming with exhaustion. But there's pride, too. Small, muddy, and sore, but real. And so you leave the riverbank behind, knowing tomorrow your shoulders will remind you exactly how heavy water is.
Your shoulders still ache from the shadoof's stubborn buckets, but this morning gives you a small mercy, shade. You follow a worn path lined with dusty stones until, like an oasis in a dream, you step beneath a canopy of palm fronds. Their leaves whisper overhead, casting soft patterns of light and shadow on the ground. Welcome to the quiet heart of Babylon's gardens. Palm trees and pomegranates, figs and grapes, small bursts of life in a land that otherwise tries its best to bake everything into crispy oblivion. The air here is cooler, filled with the earthy smell of damp soil and sweet fruit. A gardener plucks a ripe date from a towering palm, hands it to you, and says, "Energy for another day of regret." You bite into it. It's sticky, caramel sweet, and full of tiny seeds that lodge in your teeth like ancient dental sabotage. A factual bite of history, date palms were a cornerstone of ancient Mesopotamian agriculture. Their fruit fed workers, their trunks became beams, and their fronds fashioned baskets, roofs, even sandals when desperation got crafty. Babylon wasn't just brick and mud, it was also blooms of green, carefully nurtured with river water and aching backs. As you wander deeper, you pass pomegranate trees heavy with ruby-red orbs. One gardener cracks one open, red juice dripping down his fingers like he's auditioning for an ancient fruit horror movie. He grins and says, "Good for the heart, bad for your shirt." Inside, clusters of jewel-like seeds glisten. You pop one on your tongue, it bursts with tart sweetness, waking up taste buds you thought the sun had killed. Quirky tidbit: some Babylonians believed pomegranate seeds held tiny wishes, and eating exactly 7 could bring good fortune. Eat 8, though, and supposedly you'd end up with chronic hiccups, or worse, fall in love with your neighbor's goat. You decide to stop at 6. The gardens brim with figs, too. Soft, purple-skinned fruit that drop with dull splats onto the dirt. Bees buzz lazily, drunk on sweetness. Grapevines curl along reed trellises, their green orbs still small and sour. A young apprentice leans against a palm trunk, complaining that he'd rather be a scribe. His master replies, "Scribes get ink on their hands. We get life." Poetic, if you ignore the sweat stains. Historians still argue whether these garden groves were common in everyday homes or reserved mostly for temples and wealthy estates. Some believe that even the poorest families kept a palm or fig tree for shade and food. Others argue that it was a luxury reserved for those who didn't spend their days chasing runaway goats or fixing cracked canal walls. Speaking of goats, one bleats nearby, chewing on something suspiciously leafy. You rush over, fearing it just ate a prized date sapling. The animal stares at you with zero remorse. Joke 1 arrives when a gardener shrugs and says, "If goats ever learn to climb trees, we're doomed." You reach a small irrigation stream trickling through the grove. Children float pomegranate husks like boats. Women wash figs in baskets, while old men nap against tree trunks, their s'mores blending with buzzing insects. The simple rhythm of life hums around you. Water, fruit, sunlight, and the occasional dramatic sigh of someone who dropped an entire basket of dates. A gardener named Belty shows you how they prune palm fronds using bronze sickles lashed to long poles. Each strike sends dried leaves fluttering to the ground. He explains that if the crown grows too thick, sunlight can't reach the fruit. A lesson in balance, like not pouring too much water down one canal unless you want to recreate the great mudslide of last spring. Factually speaking, palm trees weren't just useful, they were revered. Cuneiform tablets mention them in legal codes, gifts, even love poetry. A harvest of dates could pay taxes or win favors from temple priests, though never from your annoyed neighbor who keeps stepping on fallen figs. Joke 2. Someone tells you that if you stand under a palm long enough, a date will fall and grant you wisdom. Moments later, one lands squarely on your forehead. The group applauds. "Congrats," they say. Enlightenment. As noon approaches, the shade turns precious. You sit beneath a fig tree, soft grass brushing your legs. A light breeze carries the scent of crushed mint growing between rows of vegetables. You sip barley beer, thin, lukewarm, but refreshing. Nearby, a cat sleeps curled around a basket of pomegranates, undisturbed even when a rooster struts past like it owns the orchard. Someone shares a quiet debate. Historians still argue whether the legendary gardens described in old poems, lush, overflowing with exotic flowers and creatures, were actual places or just romantic exaggerations.
Were they real sanctuaries or poetic fantasies written by scribes who never had to haul a shadoof bucket in their lives? Joke 3. One gardener sighs, "If I ever become king, I'll build a garden with shade, cold water, and no mosquitoes." Another responds, "That's not a garden, that's heaven." The sun softens into afternoon gold as you lie back against the palm bark, rough but comforting. Leaves rustle gently overhead, casting wavy shadows across the earth. You exhale slowly, letting the coolness of the grove sink into your skin. Maybe your shoulders still ache and your clothes still smell like river mud and regret, but for now, surrounded by palms and pomegranates, you let yourself breathe, and the gardens, ancient and patient, breathe with you.
You don't get to stay in the shade forever. The next morning drags you back to the sun-baked edges of the fields, where rows of barley sway in the early breeze, waiting for someone to care about their hydration. You blink sleep out of your eyes and squint at a cluster of brick-lined storage pits. These are not just random holes in the ground. They are cisterns, carefully crafted by Babylonian hands and hopeful hearts to trap and store precious water when the river stops behaving. They look simple at first, rectangular or circular pits lined with mud brick or clay and sealed with bitumen, that sticky black tar scraped from riverbanks. But you step closer and realize bitumen smells like burnt marshmallows mixed with regret. Practical, though. Water doesn't leak out, and in a land where rainfall barely sends a postcard, that's worth the stench. Historical fact check. Babylonian cisterns were essential for storing water during dry spells. They used baked bricks and waterproof coatings to keep the reservoirs intact, especially in private homes, temple complexes, and garden plots. Without them, summer would turn fields into crispy flatbread. This is where Etu, the floppy-hatted gardener from before, waves you over. He points to a half-finished cistern and says, "Congratulations, you're now on mud sealing duty." You kneel beside the pit, mixing clay and straw with your hands, pressing it against the inner walls while trying not to inhale the overpowering smell of hot bitumen boiling nearby. A pot of it simmers on a small fire, bubbling like a witch's cauldron, only stickier and less magical. Joke 1. Someone tells you, if a drop of bitumen gets in your hair, just shave your head. It's easier than trying to wash it out. You laugh nervously until a drop lands on your sleeve. It's still there. Quirky tidbit, some Babylonian workers swore by adding powdered river shells to the sealing mixture to make it stronger. No idea if it actually helped or just made the water taste faintly like seafood. Etu shows you the next step, shaping a slanted channel leading from the main canal into the cistern. When the river runs high, water flows into the tank. When low, a plug of clay is removed to release stored water into smaller garden channels. You smooth the mud with a flat wooden board, sweat dripping into your eyes. Behind you, someone is carefully etching symbols into a clay tablet, recording today's water levels and how many jugs have been diverted to each plot. Bureaucracy, but in cuneiform. Historians still argue whether cisterns were managed by individuals or controlled by temple authorities who regulated usage, like ancient water lords with styluses instead of swords. Some think wealthy households stockpiled water for private gardens. Others say the community shared cisterns under strict rules. The truth probably lies somewhere between cooperation and side-eyeing your neighbor's palm tree. As the sun climbs, you move to another cistern, already filled halfway with water. The surface reflects the pale sky, and tiny insects skitter across like miniature gods on glass. A group of women lower clay pots into the water using twisted ropes. They carry the pots away to kitchens or bath areas, balancing them on their heads like it's no big deal. You try lifting one and nearly fold like an undercooked pitta. Joke 2. One woman smirks and says,
Don't worry, the pots get lighter once you grow stronger, or when your soul leaves your body. Encouraging. Next, you help build a low wall around the cistern to keep wandering goats, dogs, or curious toddlers from falling in. It's made from stacked mud bricks, pressed and set with more clay. You press your thumb into one brick, leaving a mark that will outlive your aching muscles by a few thousand years. Nearby, a small shrine sits beside a larger cistern. Offerings of bread, flowers, and small clay fish lie at its base. A gardener tells you, quietly, that some believe water spirits dwell in these tanks and must be respected. If angered, they'll dry the water or make it foul. You murmur something polite to the cistern, just in case. Joke 3. Etu says, if you hear voices coming from the cistern at night, don't worry. It's probably just the water spirits, or your imagination. Either way, go back to sleep. You climb a ladder and peer into a newly plastered cistern. The walls shine faintly with wet clay, still soft to the touch. In a few days, it'll harden into a sturdy shell. Above you, the sky is a flat, unforgiving blue. Below, the cistern is a silent promise, water for the next drought, life stored underground. By late afternoon, your hands are caked in dried mud, and your hair smells permanently of bitumen. You drink from a jug of cool barley water, sitting on the edge of a completed cistern. The air is thick with heat, but a faint breeze brushes your skin like a tired blessing. Around you, Babylonian gardeners pack away tools, leaning their shovels against date palms. Some stretch, others splash river water on their faces. The cisterns sit quietly, half buried under earth and hope, waiting for rain that may never come. You glance toward the horizon where the city's towers rise, shimmering in the heat. Somewhere in those grand walls, nobles will drink wine and admire flowers watered from these vats of sweat and mud. But for now, you're here, breathing dust and pride in equal measure. And tomorrow, there will be more mud, more water, more waiting, but also more quiet victories carved into clay.
You wake before the sun, the air still cool and tinged with the faint, earthy scent of wet clay. The mudbrick irrigation channels you helped shape yesterday have dried slightly, their edges cracking like old parchment tucked inside a forgotten tablet library. Your hands are stiff, grainy with dust, but there's no time to complain. You're expected at the gardens before the first rooster even thinks about crowing. Hey, ancient Babylon doesn't run on rest. It runs on people like you and a whole lot of canal water. Besides, if you oversleep, you'll miss out on the only mildly entertaining event of the day, watching Sadhu, the cranky older gardener, trip over his own reed sandals. It happens more often than rainfall. As you make your way through the city, the ziggurat looms in the distance, a hulking stack of sun-baked mud bricks dedicated to gods who probably aren't worried about watering cucumbers. Here's your first historical fact of the morning. Babylon's hanging gardens, if they ever truly existed, were said to feature intricate irrigation systems using screws, pulleys, and hidden waterways to lift water high above the ground. Historians still argue whether these gardens were real or just an ancient flex, crafted by scribes with too much imagination and not enough hobbies. But here, in your world, everything is built by hand and held together by mud, sweat, and the occasional prayer to Enki, god of fresh water, and please don't let this canal collapse today. The canal network is already waking up. Little streams trickle toward the fields, guided by those brick sluices you helped build. Today's task is simple in theory, but backbreaking in reality. Cleaning out silt that's clogging the channels after last night's water release. You wade ankle-deep into the muck, your feet squishing with each step like overripe dates. It's a messy job, but if you don't do it, the barley fields will dry up and the overseer will lecture you for an hour straight. And trust me, his voice is worse than stepping on a clay shard barefoot. A quirky fact to amuse you while you shovel mud: some Babylonian gardeners were rumored to use crushed snail shells to deter pests.
Whether this actually worked or was just a creative excuse to get rid of garden snails is unclear. Historians still debate if snail shell scattering was a genuine method or just someone trying to avoid admitting they'd lost their radishes to beetles again. Your shovel scrapes against something solid, not a rock, something smoother. You kneel, digging with your fingertips until you uncover a small clay figurine of a fish. You glance around before slipping it into your linen belt. These odd trinkets are often buried to bless the water channels, calling upon river spirits to keep the flow steady. Totally normal, definitely not cursed. Probably. Nearby, a group of apprentices argue about whether to widen the canal bend to keep the water from pooling. One insists that recent measurements show the slope is too shallow, while another argues that the moon's phase is influencing the water's behavior. You roll your eyes so hard you nearly see the back of your skull. Historians still argue whether Babylonian engineers incorporated astronomical observations into water distribution or if they were just really dramatic about everything. The sun is rising now, brushing the plains in gold and turning every mud brick wall into a glowing ember. You pause and wipe sweat from your brow, though the heat of the day hasn't fully landed yet. A donkey brays somewhere in the distance, probably complaining about its workload. Relatable. You think about how future civilizations will write long, confusing texts about your work, debating whether you were priests, slaves, or early environmental engineers. Honestly, you're just trying not to fall into a canal. By midday, you've redirected the water into rows of date palms. The leaves rustle softly, and you catch a rare breeze that feels like a gift from the gods, or at least a well-timed gust of desert wind. You lean against the low wall, watching the water reflect light like liquid glass as it winds its way deeper into the orchards. Your shoulders ache, your hands are raw, but there's something soothing about the rhythm of it all. Scoop, pour, scrape, breathe. Suddenly, a young boy sprints toward you, shouting that the main canal's mud brick gate has cracked. You groan, your peaceful moment shattered like a poorly fired clay tablet. The gate controls the water flow into the vegetable gardens. If it breaks, the entire plot could flood, or worse, dry up completely. And you'll be the lucky one asked to fix it. As you head back toward the main channel, you step carefully, avoiding puddles and loose bricks. One slip, and you'll be face first in water thick enough to double as porridge. You mutter a small prayer to Enki, promising to dedicate next full moon's dinner to him if he keeps the gate from collapsing entirely. Yes, bribing gods with stew is a thing. When you reach the gate, you see the problem. A crack runs along its base, water seeping through in erratic spurts like a toddler with a leaky cup. You kneel, pressing your palm against the saturated clay. It's still salvageable. You call for more mud and straw, quickly patching the weak spot while others hold the gate steady. Your clothes are soaked, your back throbs, but the crisis is contained. The apprentices cheer quietly, too tired for anything more. You allow yourself a smile. Today, disaster has been avoided, crops will be watered, and no one has drowned in a canal. That counts as a good day in Babylonian gardening. As the light begins to soften again, you trudge back toward the clay shed, smelling faintly of river water, wet earth, and triumph. Tomorrow, the canals will clog again, someone will lose a shovel, and Sidhu will probably fall into a pond. But for now, you've kept the gardens alive.
The next morning arrives with the dull ache of your muscles, reminding you that Babylonian gardening is more marathon than hobby. You drag yourself from your reed mat, blinking at the first hints of pale light sneaking in through the doorway. There's a thin layer of dust on everything, including your eyebrows, which feels like the universe's way of saying, "Good luck, buddy." Outside, the air carries the crisp scent of damp clay from last night's canal repairs, and you can hear the sluggish gurgle of water finding its path through the freshly patched mud brick gate. That's your handiwork, still holding like a champion, or like a clay pancake about to give up. Historians still argue whether ancient mud brick structures lasted decades or merely survived because no one had better building materials yet.
You're sent to work on the vegetable terraces today. Not the glamorous hanging gardens, mind you, but the practical patches of onions, leeks, and cucumbers that keep the kitchen workers from shouting at you during dinner. The terraces are carved into gentle slopes near the riverbank, supported by retaining walls of, you guessed it, mud bricks, reinforced with straw and smashed reeds. Here's your historical fact to chew on. Babylonian farmers developed a method called basin irrigation, where water is guided into square or rectangular plots surrounded by raised banks, allowing soil to absorb moisture slowly. It's clever, efficient, and also a great way to trap your sandals in sticky sludge. As you step into the fields, you're met with the sight of a skinny cow staring at you with the same amount of enthusiasm you feel for mornings. A couple of children chase a chicken between rows of barley, shrieking with joy, while the chicken looks like it's questioning all of its life choices. The irrigation water trickles through narrow furrows, catching the early sunlight and turning it into a shimmering path, like liquid bronze threading through the earth. Your task sounds simple. Adjust the water flow so each terrace gets just enough moisture, not too much. But of course the canals are as temperamental as a clay pot in a kiln. You kneel, digging small trenches and packing mud with the heel of your hand to direct water where it needs to go. It's like playing a very slow, very muddy strategy game. You wish for a reset button. While smoothing a clay bank, you hear a snippet of conversation between two elders debating whether date palms should be planted closer to the canal for easier watering or farther away to encourage deeper root growth. One swears by ancient tradition, while the other argues that root will damage the canal walls. Historians still argue whether Babylonian farmers followed strict agricultural guidelines or just did whatever their crankiest neighbor insisted upon. The sun climbs higher, and the heat begins to simmer off the ground. You roll up your sleeves and sip from a ceramic jug of lukewarm water flavored with a hint of clay. Delicious. A quirky tidbit for your growing collection. Some gardeners swore by using fish guts mixed with river silt as fertilizer. It smelled like the gods' dirty laundry, but apparently it made melons grow the size of your head. Whether true or just an excuse to play with dead fish, no one knows. You stop for a moment, watching the water fill a terrace until it looks like a tiny mirror reflecting the sky. A dragonfly skims the surface, its wings catching the light like shards of glass. You notice how the canals branch into ever smaller channels, a delicate maze of mud and intention. It dawns on you that your entire world depends on these watery veins. Without them, the city's storerooms would go empty, the temples silent, and the gardens nothing but cracked earth. Suddenly, a shout interrupts the peaceful scene. A clay water jar has shattered near the main canal, its contents pouring away uselessly. A young apprentice stands frozen, holding the broken handle like it might bite him. You jog over, trying not to laugh at his expression. Sure, it's a minor disaster, but at least no one's fallen into the canal today. Yet. You help him collect the shards, careful not to cut your hands. Clay pots are precious, shaped by skilled artisans and fired in kilns that get hotter than your temper when someone misplaces your shovel. By midday, the fields shimmer with reflected sunshine and every gardener glistens with sweat and dust. You take a brief break beneath a fig tree, gnawing on flatbread that tastes faintly of charcoal. Around you, workers chatter about everything from water taxes to last night's dream involving a goat with wings. You chuckle because, honestly, it tracks. Back to work. You adjust a final sluice gate, watching as the water obeys, swirling into new furrows. It's oddly satisfying, like convincing a stubborn cat to sit. Down the slope, you notice a shrine stone, half buried in weeds, marked with symbols honoring Enki. You quietly press your fingertips to it, not because you're superstitious, but because water gods might hold grudges, and you're not taking chances. As afternoon drifts toward evening, the fields take on a bronze glow. The canals run quieter now, their burdens lighter. You walk along the mud brick wall, your footprints filling with thin, running water. Somewhere, a musician plucks a lute-like instrument, its soft twang carried on the breeze. You think, just for a moment, that all this toil might be worth it. Tomorrow there'll be new cracks to patch, new debates about moon phases and planting seasons, and probably a fresh swarm of locusts with no respect for personal boundaries. But tonight, the gardens breathe easy under your watch, and so do you.
Dawn creeps in again, smudging the horizon with pale lavender and dust-yellow light, and you're already on your feet, toes curling against the cool, packed earth. The air tastes faintly of river water and burnt straw from last night's hearth fires. Your back still protests every movement, as if your spine has filed a formal complaint with the gods. No time to argue with it. You've been assigned to the orchard district today, where the date palms, fig trees, and pomegranate bushes stretch out like quiet green guardians of Babylonian breakfast. As you walk, you pass the canal you patched 2 days ago. The mudbrick repair still holds, stubborn and proud, like Sadhu when someone suggests a better way to prune fig trees. A historical fact to start your morning brain humming. Babylonians were among the first to domesticate date palms, carefully selecting the strongest trees and hand-pollinating them using ladders, reeds, and sheer nerve. It's a crucial task because without dates, half the population wouldn't survive the dry seasons or have anything sweet to snack on while pretending to enjoy long temple ceremonies. You reach the orchard and are greeted by rows of date palms casting thin, dappled shadows across the ground. Your task is maintaining the small circular basins around each tree, called ring basins, where water pools before sinking down to nourish the roots. The basins must be reshaped daily because the water erodes their edges faster than you can say, "Where's my shovel?" You kneel down, scooping mud to fortify the rims. It squishes between your fingers with a noise that makes you question every life choice that led you here. At least it's not latrine duty. Nearby, you overhear two gardeners having a heated debate over whether date syrup or fermented barley makes better offerings to Ishtar during harvest festivals. One insists the goddess prefers sweetness. The other argues she enjoys a little barley brewed during celestial negotiations. Historians still argue whether these offerings were symbolic or genuinely believed to influence divine favor. You privately think Ishtar probably has better things to do than judge snack quality. As the morning light warms your shoulders, you're joined by a lanky teenager tasked with climbing the palms to thin the fruit clusters. He grins at you, adjusts the rope harness around his waist, and scrambles up the trunk like a squirrel on a mission. You wince just watching him. No safety net, no second chances. A quirky tidbit for your mental notebook: some gardeners used fish oil to soften their hands and prevent blisters when climbing. Smelled terrible, but apparently worked wonders. You decide blisters are preferable to fish-scented palms. Water flows steadily through the channels you helped clear earlier this week, splitting off into narrow tunnels that feed each basin. The sound is soft and rhythmic, almost like breathing. You pause to adjust a broken reed gate, propping it up with a rock. For a moment, the sunlight catches the water just right, turning it into glittering threads weaving the entire garden together. Then comes the daily chaos. A panicked shout from the far end of the orchard startles a flock of pigeons into flight. You jog over, half expecting a canal to have burst or a palm tree to have toppled over. Instead, you find a goat, yes, a goat, standing ankle-deep in a water basin and chewing on a young pomegranate branch with blissful obliviousness. Beside it, a horrified apprentice is flapping his arms like he's trying to scare away a sandstorm. You grab the goat gently by its horns and guide it out, while muttering a prayer to any god responsible for livestock and sanity, probably Ninurta. By midday, the heat drapes itself over the orchard like a heavy wool blanket. You retreat to the shade of a fig tree, where the sweet smell of ripening fruit mingles with the earthy tang of damp soil. You chew on a stale piece of bread, soaking it in watered-down date syrup to make it slightly less depressing. Around you, other workers collapse onto patches of grass, their conversation drifting lazily, from canal taxes to a rumor about a priest growing grapes in clay pots on his roof. You return to work, adjusting water flow with small mud dams, shaping basins, and checking for leaks in the channel walls. Every now and then, your mind wanders to bigger questions, like who first thought mud, straw, and river silt would make reliable building material?
or why palm trees are so tall when all the fruit is up there and you're down here. Historians still debate whether these gardens were managed by skilled engineers or regular folks learning by trial, error, and occasional divine intervention. As the day settles toward evening, a soft breeze rustles through the palms, stirring the fronds like quiet applause. You watch the shadows grow long and the sky shift to bronze then rose. A water bird lands on the edge of a basin, dipping its beak gracefully before flying off. Everything smells of damp clay, dates, and the kind of tired that feels almost peaceful. Your hands are caked in mud, your tunic streaked with water stains, but as you look over the orchard, alive, watered, and breathing, you feel a small spark of pride. Tomorrow, there will be new leaks, fresh arguments, and probably another goat incident. But right now, the gardens are safe. The trees whisper softly in the breeze, and you have done enough.
You wake to the sound of dripping water, slow, deliberate droplets hitting a clay bowl somewhere near your sleeping mat. Not exactly soothing, but at least it's not someone yelling that the canal collapsed again. You stretch your sore limbs and grope for your sandals, still damp from yesterday's orchard mud. Outside, the air is cool and heavy with the smell of wet earth, like the whole city exhaled overnight. The sky is pale, and the first rays of sunlight glint off the water pooled in the irrigation ditches like thin silver ribbons. Today, you're assigned to the temple gardens near the ziggurat. Lucky you. It's not a simple vegetable patch or orchard where mistakes get you a stern lecture and maybe a goat nibbling your tunic. These gardens belong to the gods, or rather the priests who insist they speak for them. One misplaced stone and someone might accuse you of disrespecting Marduk himself. No pressure. You trudge through the quiet streets, past mud-brick houses still sleeping, their flat roofs scattered with sleeping mats and clay jugs catching dew. Eventually, the colossal shape of the ziggurat emerges from the morning haze, tiered and majestic, like it's keeping a close eye on all your bad decisions. Here's your historical fact. Temple gardens in ancient Mesopotamia weren't just decorative. They were essential for religious rituals, supplying herbs, flowers, and sometimes exotic plants used in offerings and healing practices. The priests guarded them more fiercely than a cat guards its sunlit nap spot. As you approach the garden gate, a priest in a pristine white robe greets you with a nod that says, "You're lucky to be here," and "Don't mess this up," simultaneously. The garden inside is quieter than the public fields, with smooth paths lined by trimmed shrubs and shallow streams reflecting the towering ziggurat. Tiny clay figurines of gods and river spirits sit among the flower beds, staring at you with blank little eyes that definitely aren't judging you. Probably. Your task is meticulously simple but terrifying in its precision. Clear silt from the decorative water channels without disturbing the sacred lotus flowers that float in them. Yes, actual lotus plants. A quirky tidbit for today, though lotus flowers are more famously connected to Egypt, clay tablets suggest Mesopotamian priests kept exotic plants imported through trade routes, sometimes just to show off. You crouch by the water, cupping your hands to scoop out the fine gray silt that clouds the stream. The water chills your skin, and every ripple makes you paranoid you've harmed a sacred petal. Nearby, two priests whisper loudly enough for you to hear. One insists that the garden's layout mimics the divine order of the universe, with water channels symbolizing the rivers of creation. The other argues that certain statues are misplaced and interrupt cosmic harmony. Historians still argue whether temple gardens symbolize the mythic landscape of gods or were simply luxurious displays of wealth and power. Either way, you keep your head down and your hands steady. You move methodically, clearing silt, straightening small clay barriers, adjusting tiny reed gates. Each channel is more delicate than the last, like the veins of a leaf. A dragonfly lands briefly on your wrist, light, fragile, gone in a blink. You almost smile before remembering you're standing in holy mud and could ruin everything with a poorly timed sneeze. By midday, the sun bleaches the sky and the stone walls of the temple shimmer with heat.
A priest hands you a cup of cool barley water, thin, slightly sour, and the best thing you've tasted all week. For a moment, there's peace. Then comes a shriek. You turn to see a young temple apprentice frantically trying to fish a reed broom out of the sacred pond. You sigh, splash over, and help retrieve the soggy tool while the boy mutters apologies to every god in alphabetical order. Once the crisis is contained, you're directed to tend the herb terrace, tiered platforms of chamomile, mint, hyssop, and strange purple blossoms used in purification rituals. The soil here is richer, darker, smelling faintly of dung and crushed leaves. You take a bronze blade and carefully trim overgrown stems. One careless snip and you might upset a priest who believes herbs sing to the gods. You wouldn't survive that lecture. As you work, you notice tiny clay beads buried at the edge of each terrace. A gardener beside you whispers that they're offerings to Nin Shubur, messenger of the gods, to carry prayers for healthy plants. A quirky bit of gardening superstition. Sure, but considering last week's drought scare, you're tempted to make your own bead and chuck it in for luck. By late afternoon, the water channels sparkle again, clear and calm. The herb terraces are tidy, and the lotus pools ripple with soft elegance. You pause beneath a pomegranate tree near the wall, watching a priest sprinkle scented oil into a fountain. The garden smells of mint and river breeze, with just a hint of ancient responsibility. As the sun begins to sink, soft bells echo from the temple. Work is done. The priests thank you with restrained nods, not quite gratitude, more like, you didn't ruin anything today. Congratulations. You take it as a win. You head back down the path, feet dragging, tunic stained with sacred mud. Behind you, the ziggurat glows in gold and amber as if the gods themselves lit it from within. Tomorrow you'll return to regular fields with goats, mud, and loud arguments about moon phases. But for now, you've walked in the gardens of gods and survived without knocking over a single holy statue. That's worth a quiet smile.
You're starting to think your spine has the structural integrity of wet papyrus. Dawn leaks across the rooftops of Babylon, staining the sky with a sleepy mix of rose and gold, while you rub your aching shoulders and try to remember whether you're a gardener, a mud sculptor, or just a semi-conscious mound of clay. Your name might as well be, "Hey, you, carry this," because that's how everyone addresses you at this point. Today, you've been sent beyond the city walls to inspect the farmlands that stretch toward the river plains, where irrigation stops being tidy and becomes a battle of wits, mud, and questionable engineering.
You're starting to think your spine has the structural integrity of wet papyrus. Dawn leaks across the rooftops of Babylon, standing the sky with a sleepy mix of rose and gold, while you rub your aching shoulders and try to remember whether you're a gardener, a mud sculptor, or just a semi-conscious mound of clay. Your name might as well be, "Hey you, carry this," because that's how everyone addresses you at this point. Today you've been sent beyond the city walls to inspect the farmlands that stretch toward the river plains, where irrigation stops being tidy and becomes a battle of wits, mud, and questionable engineering. You hitch a ride on a creaky wooden cart pulled by two unimpressed donkeys. The air is cool, the kind that holds the promise of heat like a secret. You pass through the city gate, where guards yawn and traders are already arguing about grain prices. Beyond the walls, the landscape opens wide. Patchwork fields, snaking canals, and clusters of palm trees waving lazily like they know you're the one who's going to have to fix the leaks. Historical fact for your morning enlightenment, Babylonian agriculture relied heavily on a system called shaduf irrigation, where weighted poles with buckets attached were used to lift water from canals to higher fields. You see one now, a wooden beam balanced on a pole, a clay bucket dangling from one end, a rock from the other. A farmer pulls it down, fills the bucket, and swings it over the field, over and over, his muscles moving on pure muscle memory and stubbornness. You hop off the cart and are immediately greeted by the foreman,
a sunburned man with a beard that could hide small animals. He points toward a cracked canal wall near a wheat field and says, "Fix it before it becomes a river." You trudge over, squatting beside the fissure. Water dribbles through like it's testing its escape route. You pack it with wet clay and straw, smoothing it with a practiced hand. Clay squelches under your nails, the universal sign that you're earning your barley bread today. Nearby, two workers argue over whether planting barley closer together increases yield or causes root rot. One insists his grandfather swore by dense crops. The other says the moon's phase affects whether the soil breathes properly. Historians still argue whether ancient farmers followed lunar cycles for planting or whether that idea sprouted later like an overconfident weed. Either way, the debate grows louder until someone suggests a wrestling match to settle it. You quietly walk away. A quirky tidbit to brighten your muddy morning, farmers sometimes placed small terracotta figurines shaped like frogs in the fields, believing they encouraged water to stay and crops to grow. You spot one half buried near a patch of onions, its tiny clay smile chipped but determined. You give it a nod of respect, you're both just trying your best. As the sun climbs higher, the heat stalks you like a lazy lion. You move on to check on the drainage ditches, narrow trenches designed to carry excess water away so fields don't drown. Clogged with silt and stray reeds, they look like the river sneezed and forgot to clean up. You wade in barefoot, pulling muck out with your hands while thinking about career options that involve less mud. Maybe pottery, maybe cloud watching. At mid-morning, a man named Haru offers you a sip of date palm wine from a clay cup. It's sweet, sharp, and burns slightly on the way down, like drinking sunshine that got into a fistfight. You thank him. He shrugs and says, "Tomorrow I might need you to pull my cart out of a ditch, so consider this a down payment." Fair enough. You follow a narrow canal that leads to a field of flax, its slender stalks whispering in the breeze. Children squat nearby, spreading harvested flax on reed mats to dry. You watch them giggle as they flick water at each other. For a moment, you envy how their biggest worry is whether lunch will include honey. Then, you see one accidentally fall into the shallow canal with a splash. They emerge muddy, smiling. Problem solved. Farther out, at the edge of the fields, stands a weathered stone boundary marker carved with cuneiform. It warns about water theft. Yes, that's a thing, and promises curses from the gods if someone steals irrigation water from their neighbor. Historical fact, water disputes were common enough in Mesopotamia that entire sections of Hammurabi's code dealt with them. You run your finger over the carved symbols, thinking about how ancient laws and today's mud are more closely related than most people admit. By noon, your tunic clings to your skin, soaked with sweat and irrigation water. You find shade under a date palm and chew on flatbread stuffed with mashed chickpeas and herbs. It tastes like relief. Farmers lounge nearby, trading stories about runaway donkeys and a rumor that someone found a freshwater spring that makes you taller. You're skeptical, but also tempted. The afternoon drags you back to the canals. A section of embankment near a lentil field has collapsed, spilling water where it doesn't belong. You and two others haul mudbricks, stacking them to rebuild the wall. One worker tells a joke. Why did the canal break? Because it couldn't handle the flow of responsibility. You laugh harder than it deserves. It's either that or cry. By evening, the light turns honey gold, glancing off the canals like melted metal. The fields are quiet now, crops drinking their fill under the settling dusk. You stare at the muscles in your arms, caked in dried mud, and think you're starting to look like a statue, one commissioned by a god who ran out of marble and patience. You climb back onto the donkey cart. The air cools, crickets start their nightly serenade, and the city walls grow larger with each creak of the wheels. Behind you, the fields stretch endlessly, carved by water and worry, and somehow, by hope. You wake to the same rhythmic splash of muddy water against dusty clay,
And no, you haven't magically teleported to a spa. You're still here, among the determined gardeners of Babylon, and today you edge closer to the towering ziggurat gardens. Your sandals squish into soil softened by last night's cautious watering. Out here, every drop is life, and every misstep is mud on your only decent tunic. Yes, the one you swore you'd keep clean. The air feels thicker today, heavy with humidity and the faint smell of wet reeds drying in the sun. A gardener named Atana waves you over, holding a woven basket dripping with clay pellets. They're not snacks, unless you enjoy your food gritty and slightly poisonous. These are early, slow-release watering beads, made from clay mixed with animal dung and crushed seeds. When buried near roots, they absorb water at night and release it slowly during the scorching day. Historians still argue whether this was intentional engineering or just what happened when gardeners got lazy and mixed everything in one bucket. As you follow Atana, you pass a clay tablet resting on a rock. It's etched with marks, garden schedules, lunar watering charts, and a surprisingly aggressive doodle of a goat labeled Public Enemy. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Babylonian farmers really did track lunar phases to determine irrigation, believing the moon influenced water levels in canals. You squint at the grooves. Maybe it's just farmer logic, or maybe ancient astrology had practical uses. Still debatable, just like whether pineapple belongs on pizza. You and Atana reach a series of narrow mudbrick channels that wind like sleepy snakes through herb beds, mint, coriander, and an herb that smells like regret and foot fungus. You're handed a flat wooden paddle to help direct the flow. The water creeps out from leather-sheathed pipes, trickling just enough to keep the leaves perky. Too much water, and the soil collapses like soggy granola. Too little, and the plants give up faster than you did in 9th grade math. Atama shows you a fringe but genius method. Crushed fish scales sprinkled around the roots. They work as fertilizer and reflect sunlight, cooling the soil. You try not to gag as a dried fish eye stares at you from the dirt. According to one old gardener's tale, fish remnants also keep away mischievous garden spirits. Historians still argue whether this was spiritual protection or just a clever way to reuse lunch leftovers. The sun climbs higher, turning the mud-brick walls into radiating toasters. A young apprentice jogs over with a bucket of, wait, milk? He pours it into a thin stream that runs towards pomegranate trees. You blink hard. Apparently, watering with diluted sour milk was believed to strengthen roots and ward off soil parasites. A quirky tidbit, sure, but also slightly tragic for anyone who wanted cereal this morning. And no, there's still no proof whether this actually worked or the trees were just too polite to die. You pause to wipe the sweat from your forehead, only for dust to stick to your skin like sprinkles on a donut. As you lean against a sun-warmed wall, you overhear a debate between two elder gardeners. One insists the hanging gardens were real, watered by a hidden spiral pump powered by donkeys. The other claims it was just highly exaggerated palace landscaping with fancy vines. Historians still argue whether the gardens truly existed or if they were just ancient Instagram filters. Nearby, a gardener uses a hollowed-out gourd as a ladle, scooping water delicately into indentations at the base of fig trees. The mud brick gutters he uses are patched with a mixture of clay and goat hair. Yes, goat hair, because it binds the clay and prevents cracking. You reach out to touch the rough edge, only for a piece to crumble onto your foot. Congratulations, you've offended 3,000 years of architecture. You're ushered to a quieter corner of the garden. Here, tall reeds line a shallow basin, their roots submerged in silty water. This is an early attempt at natural filtration. Water passes through the reeds and emerges clearer on the other side, ready to be directed into vegetable plots. One scholar claims this was the origin of constructed wetlands. Another claims you're romanticizing glorified swamp water. Historians still argue you sip some anyway and mentally prepare for stomach consequences. Joke number 2. As afternoon light softens, Atana hands you a clear whistle shaped like a frog. No, it's not a toy. It's blown to signal closing the canal gates before nightfall. You try it. It sounds like a dying duck stepping on a flute. A couple of gardeners look up, unamused. You shrug. Music is subjective. The final task is checking the mud brick cistern walls for cracks.
You drag your fingertips along them, feeling faint vibrations from water rushing inside. You remember earlier sections, like those woven reed canals or when someone tried to filter water with sand and hope. Every trick, every clump of mud, every stolen goat hair has brought Babylon's gardens to life. As dusk paints the sky bronze, you sit on a low wall, feet dangling over a patch of damp earth that smells of mint and manure. You watch water glisten in the dying sun, threading through the garden like silver veins. You're exhausted, slightly sunburnt, and unreasonably proud you didn't drown in a puddle today. But don't get too comfortable. Tomorrow, someone whispers, you'll help clean the canals. And yes, that means climbing into them. With frogs. And leeches. Historians still argue whether interns have always suffered the most. You sigh. Babylon isn't glamorous, but it's alive. And so are you. Surprising, right?
You wake before sunrise, not because you're eager, but because a frog has decided your ear makes a great stage for its morning concert. You swat at air, sis up in the gray light, and remember, today is canal cleaning day. Yes, the watery trenches that keep Babylon blooming are, unfortunately, full of mud, weeds, algae, and the occasional passive-aggressive carp. Nobody cheers. You especially don't. The sky is still stretching into pink as you trudge toward the canal banks, where other gardeners stand with tools, reed bristle brushes, wooden scrapers, and baskets made of palm fiber. A senior gardener named Shala hands you a long-handled rake and says, "Try not to fall in." Again. You smile weakly, haunted by that one time you belly-flopped into a puddle in Section 3. The memory still lives on in local gossip. Canals like these weren't just muddy ditches. They were carefully planned waterways feeding fields, orchards, and lush palace gardens. Here's today's historical fact. Babylonians designed entire city layouts around irrigation canals, ensuring water could be diverted from the Euphrates into neighborhoods and farms with precision. But of course, precision only lasts until ducks, silt, children, and whatever that green stuff is, decide otherwise. You step into the empty canal bed. Mud squelches under your feet, cool and slimy like stepping into pudding nobody asked for. Shala explains the process. Clear out debris, smooth the mud brick lining, patch cracks with a clay and straw mix, and make sure the slope still guides water gently forward. Too steep, and you get rapids. Too flat, and water sits around breeding mosquitoes with personal vendettas. Historians still argue whether some canals were intentionally angled for faster water flow, or if nature just did its thing and the gardeners took credit. As you drag your rake along the canal floor, you uncover a fringe but fascinating find, small clay tokens shaped like fish and goats buried in the mud. Shala says these were offerings to river spirits to ensure steady water. Or, she adds with a shrug, kids just dropped their toys. Historians still argue whether these tokens had religious meaning or were a prehistoric version of lost Lego bricks. The sun peaks higher. Sweat pools at the base of your neck as you shovel clumps of algae to the side. Nearby, two apprentices are trying to lift a stone that's obviously too heavy. You suggest the ancient technological innovation called "use both of you on one side." It works. Congratulations, you've invented teamwork. Your next task is smoothing the canal walls. They're made of sun-dried mud brick lined with a thin clay plaster. You take a flat paddle and sweep it across, smoothing cracks where water might leak. The clay mixture, you notice, is blended with bitumen, naturally occurring tar from riverbanks. It seals the walls like ancient waterproof paint. Mainstream historians widely agree the Babylonians were among the first to use bitumen for hydraulic engineering, long before someone thought, hey, this would make a great driveway. But then comes the quirky tidbit. Some gardeners whisper that crushed date seeds mixed into the clay make the water flow more politely. You're not sure what that means. Does the water say please and thank you? But they swear by it,
So you toss in a handful. The water, when released later, still doesn't complement your sandals. As you move along, you spot frogs sunbathing on stones like tiny judgmental princes. One particularly smug frog sits on your rake. You try to shoo it, but it just blinks slowly, like it pays rent here. Third joke of the day, you consider offering it your job. Once the canal is cleaned and smoothed, you get to the patching part, mixing clay, sand, crushed reeds, and animal dung into a paste. The dung adds fiber and insulation, keeping the canal walls from drying and cracking in the heat. You smear the paste onto weak spots until they look like fresh chocolate frosting. Do not lick it, ever. Shala shows you the water lifting device used to refill these canals, the shadoof. A long wooden pole balanced on a frame with a bucket on one end and a stone counterweight on the other. You push the pole down, scoop water, and swing it into the cleaned canal. It's simple physics, except your arms feel like overcooked noodles. Here's where scholars get spicy. Some say the shadoof was actually invented in Mesopotamia, not Egypt. Others say that's nonsense and point to Nile frescoes. Historians still argue, and the bucket keeps dripping no matter who's right. Now comes the test. Water flows from the upper gate, trickling into the newly cleaned canal. You watch anxiously for leaks, halapses, or frogs surfing on lily pads like tiny gladiators. The water glides along the channel smoothly. Success. No major floods. No accidental redirect into the goat pen. Yet. Around you, the gardeners breathe a collective sigh of relief. One older man carves a small symbol into the wet clay lining, a crescent moon, marking the last time this section was cleaned. Babylonians often used lunar calendars to schedule maintenance. That's efficiency and astrology combined, like a horoscope that says, "Avoid drama, clean your canal." As afternoon light begins to soften, you sit at the canal's edge, legs dangling. The water now reflects golden sunlight and ripples like a sheet of silk. You're exhausted, coated in mud, and proudly smelling like fermented swamp. But you helped keep the lifeblood of Babylon flowing. Not bad for someone who once tripped over a watering jar. Before you head back, a gardener hands you a clay cup of barley drink. Slightly sour, slightly sweet, and definitely warm because refrigeration hasn't been invented. You sip it anyway. It tastes like survival. You glance toward the horizon, where palm trees sway gently and birds glide above the glimmering canals. Tomorrow you'll be assigned to check the water wheels by the river. And yes, that means climbing again. Historians still argue whether apprentices were volunteers or victims of peer pressure. For now, though, you sit in the fading light, letting the hum of water, frogs, and distant city chatter lull your thoughts. Babylon breathes because its canals are alive. And so, somehow, are you.
You wake to the low groan of wooden wheels turning somewhere beyond the date palms, like a sleepy giant stretching its joints. Today is Wheel Day, specifically the water wheels by the river. And no, you don't get to simply observe. You get to climb them, clean them, and try not to become part of the machinery. Yay, Babylonian fun! The sky is a pale lavender as you make your way across the damp soil, past rows of barley, onions, and tired-looking gardeners sipping barley drinks like ancient coffee. A thin mist hangs above the canal, catching the first hints of sunlight. You spot the water wheel ahead, a massive wooden structure with clay jars attached along its rim. As the wheel turns, the jars scoop river water and dump it into elevated channels that feed the palace gardens and terraces. Historical fact of the day, these proto-water wheels, called noria, were used to lift water without animal labor, though some versions did rely on donkeys or humans walking in endless circles. Scholars still debate whether Mesopotamia or Syria saw them first, but either way, your calves are already pre-aching.
Shala, the same supervisor from yesterday, hands you a woven satchel of tools. Inside, a reed brush, a clay sealant knife, and a pouch that smells suspiciously like goat dung. "For patching leaks," he says, "not snacking." You nod, still unsure whether that was a joke or a warning. You reach the riverbank. The Euphrates glides by with lazy confidence, shimmering silver and gold. The wheel creaks steadily, powered by the current. Clay buckets filled with water rise, tip into carved channels, and fall back down with a wet thunk. It's rhythmic, almost hypnotic, until you remember someone has to climb up and scrape algae off each bucket. That someone is you. As you approach the wheel's base, you pass a fringe curiosity, small clay figurines tucked into a crack of the wheel's frame. They're shaped like fish, birds, and one that looks suspiciously like a very round cat. Gardener lore says placing these charms ensures the wheel won't jam. Historians still argue whether these are genuine spiritual offerings or just bored apprentices trying to make pottery cats famous. You step onto a wooden ladder slick with river spray. Your hands grip the sides, knuckles white as you climb higher. The wheel groans under your weight. A jar filled with river water swings past your ear, splashing your shoulder. Congratulations, you're baptized by Euphrates. That's got to count for something historically significant. Maybe. At the top, you cling to the frame and begin scraping green slime off the inner edges of the clay jars. The algae is slick, cold, and clings like your will to live on Monday mornings. Below, the gardeners look like ants, tiny, judgmental ants. With each scrape, river wind whips against your face. You mutter something about hazard pay, which of course doesn't exist yet. Historians still argue whether ancient workers were compensated with wages, food, or just good vibes from the gods. While cleaning, you overhear two apprentices arguing from the riverbank. One claims the hanging gardens used a chain pump system to lift water, with bronze buckets linked in an endless loop. The other says it was all done by slaves hauling water in jars up steep stairs. Scholars still argue how those mythical gardens were watered or if they even existed. You're too busy not falling to pick a side. A quirky tidbit comes next. Shala shouts up that if algae keeps growing on the jars, you should rub them with boiled olive oil mixed with crushed snail shells. "Prevent new growth," he insists. You hesitate. Olive oil, valuable. Snail shells, plentiful. But who first thought, let's rub snail dust on the water buckets? Probably someone with too much time or too many snails. Still, you smear the mixture on. It smells like salad gone wrong. You inch along the wheel's rim, patching a crack with clay mixed with goat dung and river sand. As you press it into place, a jar swings by and splashes water directly into your face. Second joke of the day. You consider applying for a job in accounting, but math hasn't been invented properly yet. Climbing down is worse. Your feet slip. Your heart lurches. For a moment, you cling to wet wood like a very stressed koala. Below, a frog watches from a lily pad, unimpressed. Third joke. Even the wildlife judges you. Feet finally back on solid ground, you're handed a porous clay cup filled with river-chilled water. It tastes slightly of silt and victory. You sit on a sandstone block to catch your breath, watching the wheel turn more smoothly now. Water flows freely into elevated channels lined with bitumen and palm fibers, heading off to feed vegetable plots and fruit trees. Shala sits beside you and shares the mainstream fact of the hour. Cuneiform tablets from Babylon mention workers assigned specifically to maintain water wheels and canals, proving this wasn't a random chore, but a skilled role. You nod, feeling oddly honored and extremely dirty. Nearby, a young scribe sketches diagrams of the wheel into a clay tablet. You sneak a peek. Simple shapes, angled lines, a few notes about torque and water flow. Historians still argue whether these sketches were scientific drafts or scribbles to help someone remember which part to fix later. As the sun leans westward, shadows stretch long across the river. Dragonflies buzz over the water's surface like glittering needles. You notice a small shrine by the riverbank, just a carved stone with offerings of dates and barley cakes, supposedly dedicated to Ea, god of water and wisdom. Someone placed a tiny clay fish there this morning. The day winds down. Gardeners pack up tools, their arms streaked with mud. You flex your aching fingers, feeling each joint complain. But there's a quiet pride, too. You kept Babylon flowing, literally. Without these wheels, canals would dry, crops would wither, and someone important would probably throw a royal tantrum. Walking back through the eastern gate, you pass nightly irrigated fields glowing in golden light. Date palms sway softly. Water trickles through a narrow channel at your feet, clear and cool, like a promise of rest. Tomorrow you'll help plant seedlings in fresh mud beds. Historians still argue whether those who planted or those who watered had the harder job. Right now, you argue for a nap. The wheel creaks once more behind you, a lullaby of wood, water, and effort. And you keep walking, caked in mud, but oddly content.
You wake to the earthy smell of damp soil and the distant braying of donkeys, which, for reasons unknown to science or sanity, seems to be their version of good morning. Today, instead of climbing wheels or scrubbing algae out of canals, you're assigned to seedling duty. Sounds peaceful, right? Well, try kneeling in wet mud for hours while being judged by a goose with anger issues. The first rays of soft golden light creep over the horizon, catching glimmers on puddles left from last night's water release. Babylonians often flooded small plots before planting to soften the earth, a practical method called basin irrigation. Historical fact of the day: they used wooden or bronze hose to break up the soil, but more often they just used their feet, trampling mud like they were making wine, but less glamorous and more likely to attract worms. You join a small group of gardeners carrying woven baskets filled with seedlings, barley, leeks, chickpeas, and tiny date palm sprouts wrapped in damp cloth. The soil here is dark and soft, freshly raked into neat furrows like rows of chocolate frosting. You take a bundle of barley seedlings. Each one is a fragile green blade, delicate as hope, and twice as likely to wilt if you sneeze wrong. As you kneel, your feet sink into mud, with a sound that can only be described as ancient squish. A gardener named Larsa demonstrates. Press the seedling's roots gently into the soil. Fold mud over like a blanket. Give a little pat of encouragement. Then move on. Repeat it 100 times until your back files a formal complaint against your life choices. Here comes the quirky tidbit. Some gardeners whisper a little poem to each seedling. Supposedly, plants grow better when spoken to sweetly. One gardener croons, "Grow tall, don't fall, make bread for us all." You try it with your seedling. It immediately droops. Historians still argue whether this poetic method improves growth or just boosts gardener morale. Beyond the fields, you hear the splash of water being released from a small wooden gate. A narrow canal leads into the plot, trickling between rows. You remember earlier sections, how water traveled from river to wheel to canal to garden. Now here it is, soaking your knees. You almost feel poetic about it. Almost. While planting, you spot a fringe invention lying by a palm tree. A clay pot with a pointed bottom and tiny holes. Larsa explains it's an ola, a buried pot that slowly releases water to the roots. You bury it near a row of leeks, fill it with water, and cover the top with a flat stone. Water seeps out gradually, keeping soil moist. Historians still argue whether Babylonians invented this independently or borrowed the idea from even older Sumerian practices. Either way, your inner modern gardener is impressed. and slightly jealous. A goose waddles over, eyes full of malice. You offer it a barley seedling in friendship. It bites your sleeve instead. Second joke, geese are proof anger transcends time. You continue planting, hands working rhythmically, sun rising higher. The warmth dries the dew from the leaves and paints your skin in soft gold. Occasionally, a scribe walks past, jotting down numbers in a clay tablet. How many seedlings planted, how much water used, and probably how many times you almost fell over. Historical fact, Babylonian record-keeping was meticulous, especially for agriculture. They recorded crop yields, seed quantities, and even farmer complaints, though likely edited for dramatic effect. Nearby, two gardeners argue about mulch. One swears by using chopped reeds to keep moisture in. The other uses goat hair mixed with ash. Historians still argue which method was more effective, or if the goat just missed its hair. You test both, laying them gently around seedlings. The goat hair one smells like regrets and livestock. As midday heat builds up, the mud around you begins to crack slightly. You grab a clay scoop and water the seedlings using runoff from the canal. Each trickle of water makes the soil shimmer, and the leaves perk up like they've just had ancient espresso. Another quirky sight, Larsa shows you a scarecrow-like figure, except it's made of reeds, old tunics, and a gourd for a head. It's supposed to scare birds. Instead, a raven lands on its shoulder, like it's their lunch date. You shoo it away. It caws in what you assume is raven laughter. Third joke, you might start charging birds rent at this point. By afternoon, the field looks alive. Tiny green shoots poking up in neat rows, mud glistening between them like chocolate rivers. Your hands are stained brown, your knees are numb, and yet there's a strange satisfaction in seeing life sprout from soggy dirt. To mark the end of planting, an elder gardener presses a cylinder seal into wet clay at the edge of the plot. The seal shows a crescent moon and 3 stalks of barley. It represents this plot's caretaker and planting date. Historical fact, these seals acted like signatures, identifying farm ownership, harvest agreements, and divine blessings. Essentially, ancient paperwork, but prettier. As the light begins to soften into late afternoon glow, you sit beneath a date palm and sip sour, tangy pomegranate juice from a clay cup. The breeze carries the scent of wet soil, crushed herbs, and distant river water. You stretch your back and wonder if ancient chiropractors existed. They didn't. Historians still argue whether people just lived with pain or invented yoga in secret. Gardens around you hum with quiet life. Irrigation water trickles, palm fronds rustle, birds chatter. You touch a tiny barley sprout, fragile but stubborn. Babylon breathes through these fields, through muddy hands and ancient watering tricks. And somehow, you've become part of this slow miracle. Tomorrow, they say, you'll help harvest reeds for repairing dikes along the far canal. More mud, more mosquitoes, more chances for frogs to judge you. But tonight, you get to rest. You rise, feet heavy but heart oddly light, and walk back along the canal path. Water glints in the sunset like hammered bronze. Seedlings sway in the breeze, whispering promises of bread and beer in months to come. And you, muddy and mosquito-bitten, feel strangely at peace.
The morning air is soft, almost indecisive, as if it hasn't quite decided whether to stay cool or start warming into the stubborn heat of a Babylonian day. You trudge toward the far canal, muscles still sore from yesterday's seedling planting, but there's a quiet pride humming under the aches. Today, you're tasked with reinforcing embankments with freshly harvested reeds.
Nothing glamorous, nothing thrilling, just mud, water, and the persistent threat of slipping into the river. Perfect for a sleepy historical adventure, really. The fields stretch endlessly, a tapestry of green and brown stitched with canals glinting like liquid bronze. You grab a bundle of reeds, the edges sharp against your palms. Each bundle is tied carefully with reeds from last season, braided and firm. The reeds will line the banks, preventing erosion during the river's inevitable rise. Historical fact: Babylonians were meticulous about maintaining embankments, often reinforcing them with layers of mud, clay, and plant matter. It kept irrigation flowing and the crops alive. Without this constant vigilance, famine could arrive silently and mercilessly. As you work, a small child runs past, carrying a clay cup of water for the laborers. She tips it into your hands, and the cool liquid is a blessing. You take a slow sip, savoring it, feeling the river's power ripple invisibly through the land. Quirky tidbit: some workers used crushed date seeds mixed with mud to plug minor leaks in the embankments, claiming the seeds magically sucked in the water. Scholars still argue whether it worked or if it was just superstition. You, pragmatically, just nod and smear the mixture over a crack, hoping the gods are amused. Hours pass in rhythmic monotony, the sun climbing and dipping with predictable patience. Your hands, slick with mud, braid the reeds into the bank, layer by layer, listening to the faint splash of water against the canal walls. A bird skims low, startling a frog that leaps into your work area. You chuckle quietly. Somehow, in this mess of mud and algae, life insists on happening in the most awkward ways. Historians still argue whether frogs were considered omens or just dietary hazards. You, pragmatically, just nod and smear the mixture over a crack, hoping the gods are amused. By mid-afternoon, the embankments are fortified, the reeds bending in the breeze like an army of green sentinels. You step back and admire the work, thinking of all the hands, past and present, that have shaped these fields and canals. You are part of a continuum, every scrape of mud, every careful placement of wreaths, a link in Babylon's long, patient chain of survival. The river glimmers gold and silver as the sun tilts west, reflecting off mudbrick walls and distant palm fronds. You stretch your arms and notice your hands bear tiny cuts, scars of diligence. You sit on a low embankment, listening to water trickle, reeds whisper, and distant voices hum. The city, the fields, the river, they all breathe together, slowly, deliberately. You inhale, tasting earth and dust, barley and water, and for a moment the noise of time seems to slow. Evening softens the world. Shadows lengthen and the sun fades into a wash of gentle pinks and oranges. You rise and wander back toward the city, feet heavy, heart full, body tired but quietly triumphant. Mud clings to your sandals, sweat stains your tunic, but there's a peace in knowing the water flows, the crops stand, and the gardens thrive. Somewhere above, a bird calls, a final punctuation to a long, diligent day. You pause at the canal's edge, letting your reflection ripple with the water. Tomorrow, more mud, more canals, more reeds, but tonight the sun is gone, and Babylon exhales. You are part of its slow, steady heartbeat. The evening stretches like warm honey across the landscape, and your breathing slows, matching the gentle cadence of the river. The air is cooler now, carrying the scent of wet reeds, tilled soil, and distant incense drifting from temple gardens. You sit quietly, legs dangling over a small canal, and watch tiny ripples shimmer under the fading light, thinking of the day's work, of mud on your hands, reeds braided with care, and water flowing faithfully through channels carved centuries ago.
Each sound, the soft gurgle of water, the faint rustle of palms, and the distant chatter of villagers returning home, blends into a soothing symphony, almost hypnotic in its simplicity. The city, sprawling and ancient, seems to breathe with you, gentle and patient. You let your eyes drift toward the horizon, where the ziggurat stands tall, a silent guardian watching over gardens, canals, and mud-streaked laborers like yourself. The sun's final rays slide across the river, turning it into molten gold, and for a moment, all tension in your body melts. Every scrape of mud, every careful placement of a reed, every small battle with algae and clumsy frogs now feels like a quiet triumph. You imagine the seedlings you planted, the water wheels you cleaned, the embankments you reinforced, all small but vital threads in Babylon's enduring story. You breathe in, slowly, letting the cool evening wash over you, then exhale, releasing fatigue, worry, and the persistent itch of dried mud. Somewhere along the river, a bird lands lightly on a reed, the soft tap of its feet echoing in your mind as a lullaby. Shadows deepen, the city quiets, and the soft hum of life continues in perfect, untroubled rhythm. Tonight you rest in the company of flowing water, fertile soil, and the gentle murmur of the ancient world. The canals glimmer like veins of patience, and the gardens sway, tender and alive. Your eyes grow heavy. The day dissolves into night. The river carries stories. Forward, and so do you. Gently, softly, drifting with the current of time itself. The world is steady, calm, and patient. And now you are steady, calm, and patient.